When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell our stories from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. Then our heart is in a holy place. Welcome to the Manhattan Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. We come together for reassurance and comfort. We come together for education and inspiration. We worry about climate change and war in Ukraine. We're sad about friends in hospice or in pain. We're lonely or overwhelmed with work and family. But that gathering song reminds us that here we do trust in the wisdom of each of us. For example, last Sunday, Dick Beeman reminded us that there are situations that we cannot control. When we deeply recognize that, we let go of a burden. And we are reassured when we see our faces in each other's eyes or hear our voices in each other's words. Truly, we are all in this life together. Here, our heart is in a holy place. The first announcement is really a sorrow and a joy. Yvonne Lacey, a longtime member of our fellowship, is in hospice care in Colorado. Ann Cowan is keeping us up to date on her condition. The joy is that she still has a sharp mind and sense of humor. She's in our thoughts. I call your attention to the announcements about fellowship activities noted on the screens before this service. They're also on our website at uufm.net. Next Sunday, we will meet in person. It's a hybrid service, so you can still see it via Zoom, but we will meet in person and masked. Our speaker today is Dr. Debra Bolton. As I light this chalice, hear these words in the tradition of Debra's mother's people, the Dine and the Ohkay Owingeh. Beauty is before me and beauty behind me. I am surrounded by it. I am immersed in it. In my youth, I am aware of it. And in my old age, I shall walk quietly the beautiful trail. In beauty, it is begun. And in beauty, it is ended. Walk in beauty. Now it is time for our story for all ages, The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde, read by Dr. Bolton.
A lot of times when I tell this story, I just do it, I just tell it, I put it in my own words, but the words are so beautiful. So if you'll allow me, I will read the story because it's just so beautifully written. And this is an allegory. So I encourage you to listen for the hidden meaning and the moral of this story. The Selfish Giant. Every afternoon as they came from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass. Here and there over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars, and there were 12 peach trees that in the springtime broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn bore rich fruit. The birds sang on the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop in their games in order to listen to them. How happy we are here, they cried to each other. One day the giant came back. He had been to visit his friend, the Cornish ogre, and he'd stayed with him for 7 years. After 7 years were over, he had said all that he had to say, for his conversation was limited, and he determined to return to his own castle. When he arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden. "What are you doing here? This is my garden. It's my own garden, and my garden is my own. Anyone can understand that, and I will not allow anybody to play in it but myself." So he built a high wall all around it and posted up a board, a notice board. "Trespassers will be prosecuted." He was a very selfish giant. The poor children had nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they didn't like it at all. They used to wander around the high walls when their lessons were over and talk about the beautiful garden there. How happy we were there. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant, it was still winter. The birds didn't care to sing in it, and there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head out of the grass, but when it saw the notice board, it was sorry for the children, and it slipped back into the ground and went back to sleep. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost. "Spring has forgotten this garden, so we will live here year round." The snow covered the grass, and with her great white cloak and the frost painted all over the silver trees. Then they invited the north wind to stay with them. He came. He was wrapped in furs, and he roared all day about the garden and blew the chimney pots down. "This is a delightful spot. We must ask the hail to visit." So the hail came every day for 3 hours. He rattled on the roof of the castle till he broke most of the slates. Then he ran around and round the garden as fast as he could go. He was dressed in gray, and his breath was like ice. "I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming," said the selfish giant, as he sat at the window and looked out at his cold, white garden. "I hope there will be change in the weather." But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave gold fruit to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. "He is too selfish," she said. So it was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow danced through the trees. One morning, the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ears that he thought it must be the king's musicians passing by. It was really only a little linnet singing outside his window, but it was so long since he had heard the bird in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world. Then the hail stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement. "I believe the spring has come at last," said the giant. He jumped out of his bed and looked. What did he see? He saw a most beautiful sight. Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of trees. In every tree that he could see, there was a little child. And the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they covered themselves with blossoms and were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. The birds were flying about, twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene, only in one corner it was still winter. It was the farthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small that he couldn't reach up to the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all around, crying bitterly. The poor tree was still quite covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring above it. "Climb up, little boy," said the tree, and it bent his branches down as low as it could. But the little boy was too tiny, and the giant's heart melted as he looked out. "How selfish I've been," he said. "Now I know why the spring would not come here. I will put that poor little boy on the top of the tree, and then I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever." He really was very sorry for what he had done. So he crept downstairs and opened the front door quietly and softly, went out into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he didn't see the giant coming. And the giant stole up behind him and took him gently in his hand and put him up into the tree. And the tree broke at once into blossom, and then the birds came out and sang, and the little boy stretched out his arm and flung them around the giant's neck and kissed him. And the other children were there when they saw the giant was not wicked any longer, came running back, and with them came the spring. "It's your garden now, little children." And he took great axe and knocked down the wall. And when the people were going to market at 12 o'clock, they found the giant playing with the children in the beautiful garden, and they had never seen that before. All day long, they played and played and played, and then the evening came and the children bade him goodbye. "But where is your little companion?" he asked the children. "The boy I put into the tree. The giant loved him best of all because he had kissed him." "We don't know," answered the children. "He's gone away. You must tell him to be sure to come here tomorrow." But the children didn't know where he lived, and they had never seen him again. Every afternoon when school was over, the children came back and played with the giant. But the little boy, whom the giant loved so much, never did see him again. And he said, "How I would love to see him." Well, years went over and over, and the giant grew very old and feeble. He couldn't play about anymore, so he sat in a huge armchair and watched the children. And he said, "I have many beautiful flowers, but the children are the most beautiful flowers of all." One winter morning, he looked out of his window as he was dressing. He didn't hate the winter now, for he knew it was merely the spring asleep, and the flowers were resting. Suddenly, he rubbed his eyes in wonder and looked and looked. It certainly was a marvelous sight. And the branches were all golden, and silver fruit hung down from them, and underneath stood the little boy that he had loved. Downstairs ran the giant in great joy and out into the garden. He hastened across the grass and came near the child. And when he came quite close, his face grew red with anger. "Who hath dared to wound thee?" For on the palms of the child's hands were the prints of 2 nails, and the prints of 2 nails were on his little feet. "Who hath dared to wound thee?" cried the giant. "Tell me, that I may take my big sword and slay him." "Nay," answered the child, "but these are wounds of love." "Who art thou?" said the giant, and a strange awe fell upon him, and he knelt before the little child. And the child smiled on the giant and said to him, "You let me play in your garden once. Today you shall come and play in my garden, which is paradise." And when the children ran in that afternoon, they found the giant lying dead under the tree, all covered with white blossoms. I can never get to that whole story without choking up. Such a beautiful one. Thank you.
Well, while we reflect on the message of that story, we'll take the offering. You can donate by going to our website, uufm.net, and pressing the donate button at the very bottom of the page. There you can choose to donate to our Helping Hands recipient, which this month is the Kansas Abortion Fund, formerly the Peggy Bowman Second Chance Fund. Also, or instead, you can donate to our African Family Fund, the Blessing Box at Wonder Workshop, or to our General Operations Fund. Now, while you are doing this, Renee will play Someday from the theme to St. Elsewhere. This is also the time for you to write in the chat your joys and sorrows. I'll try to read them and read them to all of you after the service. So, Renee. Well, the joys in the chats today were that first, Dixie is doing much better and sends her thanks for all the good wishes that people have sent to her. Susan Adamczyk writes that the 13 African families that we have helped support are moving into permanent housing this week. They appreciate everything that we have done. There's also happy birthday messages for 4 people: Harriet, Yankee, Pat Embers, Kathleen Tanona, and Dick Beeman. lost that. Jessica Sievers has a joy that she has recovered from COVID. She's thankful for the vaccine and the many friends and family who supported her recovery. Tom and Stacy have both a joy and a sorrow. Our joy is that our daughter Corey will marry her partner Adam in April. We are so happy for them. But the sorrow is that Stacy's dad in Albuquerque may have a serious case of cancer. So she will go visit him in a few weeks. We remember also the joys and sorrows that were unexpressed today. So let us be gentle with one another. Our speaker today is Dr. Debra Bolton. She is the director of the Office of Intercultural Learning and Academic Success. She is on the faculty of Geography and Geospatial Sciences. She's also on the board of the Nature Conservancy, which, together with Kansas State University, owns the Konza Prairie Biological Station. From her parents, she inherits genes of indigenous peoples. There's one more thing about her that I'd like to add, and that is that in a Zoom call with Dr. Bolton discussing this program, we both spontaneously and simultaneously burst into a song from South Pacific. She is truly a kindred spirit. So, Dr. Bolton.
I think a song is playing next, right?
This is
Dan?
Thanksgiving Eve by Bob Frankie.
You're going to have to unshare your screen, or okay, or I'm going to try again. Here we go.
I don't have my screen shared, I don't think.
Bob Frankie. It's so easy to dream of the days gone by. It's a hard thing to think of the times to come. But the grace to accept every moment as a gift is a gift that is given to some. What can you do with your days but work and hope? Let your dreams bind your work to your play. What can you do with each moment of your life but love till you've loved it away? Love till you've loved it away. There are sorrows enough for the whole world's end. There are no guarantees but the grave. And the life that I lived and the time I have spent are treasures too precious to say. What can you do with your days but work and hope? Let your dreams bind your work to your play. What can you do with each moment of your life but love till you've loved it away? Love till you've loved it away. As it was, so it is, as it is, shall it be, and it shall be while lips that kiss have breath. Many waters indeed only nurture love's seed, and its flower overshadows the power of death. What can you do with your day but work and hope? Let your dreams bind your work to your play. What can you do with each moment of your life but love till you've loved it away? Love till you've loved it away.
Larry assured me that you all are a very forgiving group. Thanks for listening to that. I'm going to share my screen with you now. Can you see it?
Perfect.
Okay. Then I have to click hide presenter's view twice for it to work properly. Now can you see the
Still
screen?
good.
Okay, good. Okay. So my talk today is finding joy and balance. And, you know, I'm not an expert on this, but I try to practice it as often as I can. And sometimes it just means you put yourself out there. And so, of course, I start this day in an attitude of reflection and also one of practice. But before we get started, I would like to acknowledge those who were first on this land. In Kansas, we live and work on the ancestral territory of many indigenous nations, including the Kaw, the Osage, and the Pawnee. And Kansas is currently home to the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo, the Iowa, and the Sac and Fox nations. And being from a nation that has been displaced in another part of this world, I'm from Western Colorado, and my father's people were moved out of the Uncompahgre Valley and the Ute, and my mother's people we got to stay in one place, but not all of the tribes in what is now New Mexico did. So I just say that I'm grateful to these nations, and I ask you to please remember these truths. So if you think about joyful moments in today's political environment of war, exclusions, hate, and division, we remain, as people of love, challenged in ways to find joy. We may think about good things that have happened to us, and oftentimes our minds want to replay those negative experiences, which can interfere with our joy. Trauma can do that to our emotional wiring too. But as we're together in these moments, let's reflect on ways to give ourselves grace when experiences impede our efforts in building lives of joy. So practicing joy may allow us to meet the negative challenges unfolding before us today. As Larry had spoken to before, I think it's all on our minds right now. So we can maybe take a mindfulness approach to our lives in a way to find joy and practice joy. We must remember that when we cultivate environments of well-being, we function as holistic beings who seek fulfillment through work, leisure time, spirituality, and personal development. And also we engage in self-care and joy without judgment from ourselves. And hopefully we don't care if judgments of others affect that. So as we think of like optimal health and well-being, we can find our best place for us to be in finding joy. And of course, there are times of great stress, such as meeting a deadline at work or navigating multiple challenges in your personal life or in your health, as we've been talking about this morning. What sets us apart in that is striving on a daily basis, reminding ourselves that holistic well-being is an important part of that. And it kind of takes us away from that idea that we must be in constant motion or activity with work. Usually that happens with work, and we forget about finding those moments of joy in our day. And of course, hard work is necessary and it's admirable, but we must be able to stop and recharge our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual batteries, so to speak. So you just kind of look at finding holistic well-being. You didn't know this was going to be a health reflection today, but they're all interconnected. We can't have joy. We often find it hard to practice joy until we get those other needs met. And belonging is part of that too. We emphasize belonging for everyone. And when you don't feel like you belong, that can impede your practices of joy. It can hurt your holistic and emotional well-being. It could hurt those spiritual. So we also have to feel safe and affirmed in any space in which we navigate. And once all of those are met, we move forward and we can go back and forth. Some days we may feel greatly joyous and feel like the world is really our oyster. Some days we may not feel like that. But we also understanding each other and giving one another grace. When someone is having a hard day, give them grace. And you can find joy in that. I think so. And then as we reflect on ways in which we practice and express love, that's part of it. What is love? We know that love is an emotion that reveals itself physically also. The dictionary might tell us that love is an intense feeling of deep affection and care for one another. We may even have similar feelings for our pets, our dogs, or cats, or other animal companions. What we know about love for one another is that loss manifests itself intensely because humans are wired to love. We're wired to be around one another, and loving one another unconditionally offers that path to joy. And then our cultural behaviors. And of course, our culture is this lens through which we view the world, and it tells us how to behave in that world. And we learn this through our socialization from the moment we open our eyes after we're born. Why then are we challenged to find joy? Well, at any given time of the year, or even on a state level, some of us navigate xenophobic comments by education leaders, as we heard this week in Kansas. And we know on the global scale, we have war going on at any given time. We often don't know when it's coming. We might look at the signs, but sometimes we go, okay, let's not think about that. So we often have to learn how to compartmentalize those negative and positive feelings. How do we do that? Well, simplistically thinking, our faith in what is beautiful, what is joyful, and what symbolizes love. We have that faith. We are people of love. And so this little saying I found from Brene Brown, I said, kind of sounds like a scolding, but it does make sense given our society's extreme drive, individualism, standing out, being the best. That's a great drive, but finding that balance is often the greatest challenge for a lot of us, especially that balance when if you're out of balance and that drive impedes your ability to find joy, it impedes your ability to see one another through lenses of joy and love, especially love. And then also for ourselves, that joy and love in ourselves. We really have to practice that, because sometimes we used to be told if you're too self-centered, you're just not very nice. But what's the wrong with taking care of ourselves? Because if we don't take care of ourselves, we won't find joy. It's hard to find love, and we can't take care of others either. So it's another way to be thinking about that. I hope my slides are advancing correctly. Yes, no, anybody? Okay.
Looks good.
Okay, good. Never known. And so I was just having you think about you with some of these questions I have up. So reflecting on ways in which we balance that work and life, because that balance is one of those paths for helping us find joy. like thinking about you. Do you like to read, take walks, meditate, visit with friends, listen to music, play music? And you know, as you can see, you don't have to be some great musician to enjoy sharing your music with others. I'm trying to remember, there is this great poem about finding the song in someone else. And I can't remember the song, or I just remember the concept. We look for each other's song in one another. And I always think that's one of the joys I find, is looking for the song. I looking for the song in nature, looking for the song in another person. And as Larry and I were reflecting about our meeting, talking about this and how we talked about South Pacific, the song You've Got to Be Taught. We were discussing something else. We both started singing that. At that moment, we found a song in one another, and we celebrated that with great joy. And just celebrating those moments, it can be hard to do, but when you're aware and you look for them, it's a pretty easy thing to do. And so one of the things in reflecting on value or action that brings you closer to a vibrant way of living and that way of finding joy. And I always think, if you could design a personal ritual, what would it be? Think about that for yourself. What would that personal ritual for you to find joy? What would that be? Have you found a way to focus on the successes of that and celebrating that? Don't beat yourself up on a day that you're having a low day, but celebrating the great things when they happen, and be in the moment with those things. We call that mindfulness. And even writing a chapter in a book, in your biography about that. And I always think of ways that being joyful helps the mental health. Another one that practitioners are noticing, that when we have gratitude, we are more open to love, and we are more open to finding joy. We might even have greater productivity at work. We might have better relationships that way. One thing we would know, that in a community, it would increase social cohesion and certainly improve the quality of life for people. I'm going back to your reflections. Think of the quality of life that was improved for the Afghani families that you found housing and a home for. Think of that, what that did for that family and how it lifted them up. And maybe that was a little harder for us in the last 2 years in our COVID nightmare. Was it hard to find joy in that? Well, maybe so. But some of these other things around joyfulness, and I think sometimes joyfulness might be different than happiness. Sometimes they're the same. Sometimes they feel different to me. But how do we model this way of life so it becomes contagious for the people around you? I remember reading a quote after Betty White died. Be the kind of person that when you died 2 weeks before your 100th birthday, people said she didn't live long enough. Wow, wouldn't that be great to really put that into practice and be that kind of person? And so then I always talk about mindfulness and how we practice that, rather than keeping our minds full, just being mindful of those moments. And I always like to go to the Danish who practice the art of hygge. Hygge is credited to the people of Denmark, and the concept of coziness, contentment, and finding those simple pleasures, even if you have to create those cozy rooms for yourself at home. And I always think, well, the Danes really had this down. They're the people that created Legos. The word Lego is a contraction of 2 words, leik godt, which means play well. And I have a 19-year-old grandson who's hooked on Legos right now, and he's playing really well. And all of a sudden, Legos are very expensive, but you know, it's a joyful thing. And playing well is something that we sometimes just need to learn how to do. So setting areas of that coziness, and you know, perhaps you're saying, okay, that's kind of artificial and materialistic, but if it's a way to help you find joy, the things that remind you of joy, and that's the point of hygge, finding that joy outdoors, taking notice of the seasons and how they change, enjoying and appreciating the difference in each one of those seasons. Okay, yes, we had the high of 7 degrees. It was a little harder to enjoy the season of winter when the high is 7 degrees this week, but I'm thinking camping and things like that right now. And so, yeah, but you had to find other ways like being cozy inside the house. Challenge yourself to get fresh air every day. And then there's also the hygge with others, practicing random acts of kindness, and like sending a handwritten letter to someone local or a friend far away. Catch up with people that you don't see. And even finding those common spaces, like you know, creating a cinema club or a book club or a motorcycle riding club. There are a lot of those, and or a camping club or something like that. Something that brings you together and allows you to appreciate and enjoy each other's song, as it were. Sometimes we have to unplug to do that. Sometimes you just sit quietly. That can be a place. And then, of course, there's the hygge at work. Be sure to take your vacation time. Please don't brag that I'm losing vacation time because I don't take it. Yes, if your work might make you happy, of course, we know that we choose our professions because they make us happy. But taking time for ourselves, finding that joy in a space, and being able to take your vacation and relaxing. And sometimes you need to unplug from work. Sometimes just something like leaving a treat on your work bestie's desk or something like that, but just finding ways, because those things make you feel joyful and happy. Then if there's hygge and eating and drinking, you know, I rarely see people together around a table frowning. I just don't see it that often. They are joyful with one another at that moment. They're feeding their spirit with one another, feeding their body with nutrition, with the food, and just connecting around a table. Tables are wonderful. And I saw another saying that said, instead of building walls, build longer tables so that you can talk to each other, and make it so that your table sits lots of people. Even the smells of creating food can be an artistic thing for some people. Some people don't like to cook, and I get that. But finding that way that really feeds that emotional spirit. The Welsh have an interesting term, and I love Welsh spelling because none of those even comes close to what you say, except the C. But this is pronounced cwtf, cwtf, and it's a hug or a cuddle. And when you give someone a cwtf, you're figuratively giving them a safe place to be. And that is a way to find joy in the world. And then the Dutch have this wonderful uitvien, wonderful word, uitvien, walk in the wind or take on some sort of outdoor activity where the wind flies through your hair, which is not hard to believe in Kansas, of course. But getting out for vigorous exercise continues to be touted as nature's great analgesic, counselor, stress reliever, vitamin giver, since being outdoor also affords us natural vitamin D. Uitvien, isn't that a pretty word too? I find joy in words. And then I always say, find common ground with one another. If you can look at a picture like this, maybe people in this, the young fellows in this picture or just not anything you've ever connected with. But if you can look at a picture like this and find common ground, name all of the things that you have in common with these little guys. That is another way of finding joy and not feeling disconnected from people, but finding common ground. Like when Larry and I met for the first time a couple of weeks and we break out into song, that was common ground that we found with one another. And a writer that I've enjoyed in the past, I haven't read her lately. I mean, she's not writing anymore because she's not here, but it's Anne Morrow Lindbergh. She was a writer and the wife of Charles Lindbergh and helped him, write a lot of his journeys. She went with him, really an interesting person. But she says, don't wish me happiness. I don't expect to be happy all the time. Wish me courage and strength and a sense of humor. I will need all of them to find joy in life. And then I found another one that, you don't have to be perfect. The most important thing for you is to set boundaries in favor of your well-being and your need to recharge your mental health and your physical health and your spiritual health. Recent research has even linked chronic memory loss to environmental clutter. So keeping our houses picked up, or our desk spaces, or whatever spaces those are, and that's something I've really been trying to put into practice. So the concept of decluttering may be a path to joy as well. And then just continuing to find happiness and joy with the people that you're around. Thank you. I'm finished. I leave you with a prayer and reflection from the Uncompahgre Ute of Western Colorado, my father's people. And this is a reflection that we have. Earth, teach me stillness as the grasses are stilled with light. Earth, teach me suffering as old stones suffer with memory. Earth, teach me humility as blossoms are humble with beginning. Earth, teach me caring as the mother who secures her young. Earth, teach me courage as the tree which stands alone. Earth, teach me limitation as the ant which crawls on the ground. Earth, teach me freedom as the eagle which soars in the sky. Earth, teach me resignation as the leaves which die in the fall. Earth, teach me regeneration as the seed which rises in the spring. Earth, teach me to forget myself as melted snow forgets its life. Earth, teach me to remember kindness as dry fields weep in the rain. I challenge you to look for love in the eyes of everyone you meet and finding the song in them and practicing joy. Learn the ways of love from children and see yourself through the eyes of love. I leave you in peace.
Thank you, Dr. Bolton. Now we have time for discussion, questions for Dr. Bolton, and talk with each other. I think Rob,
I
can
just
you
asked,
control?
I just asked everyone to unmute themselves.
And can you control the seeing of people with raised hands? And
I can moderate the discussion. Yeah.
thank you. That would be a big help to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I may, I'll start with a question for Dr. Bolton. I was struck by the title of your reflection, Finding Joy. Given that you do bear the genes of indigenous peoples who have not been treated in a way that leads to joy, to say the least. How do you balance the anger, sadness, knowledge of what has been with your finding of joy in the world today? Can you say just a little bit more about that personally?
You know, I come from traumatized people. I mean, there's no way of looking around that. My mother was very traumatized. Grandparents in boarding schools, not allowed to go to school. My paternal grandmother read and wrote 4 languages and wasn't allowed to go beyond first grade because Native children weren't allowed to be in school in Western Colorado at the time. Western Colorado did allow us to vote in 1939. You know, we weren't allowed to be citizens until about 1924. And I have my grandmother's diary, and even with her first 4 boys were in World War II at the same time. That was a way for us to prove our loyalty to the country. So we were drafted and joined and did a lot of things. But as I read through her diary, I realized where my father, who was a very joyful man, who was a voracious reader, who could find joy anywhere, who is much of a contrast to my mother, who was pretty traumatized by things that had happened to her family and her mother, my maternal grandmother. So I think that as I looked at the 2 of them, I could tell my father had an easier life in that sense because he really worked hard in finding joy, and especially through nature. You know, we considered nature our relatives, and so being kind to the earth is of utmost importance to us. I was asked a question by someone, one of the scientists that work for the Nature Conservancy. The question was, how do you feel about the monetizing of ecosystems? And I said, well, to be truthful, if we see nature as our relative, so monetizing ecosystems would be a little akin to human trafficking, in that sense. But it's not a very popular I heard someone gasp. But if you really thought about it, are you monetizing your relatives? What else is that? But anyway, it was just an interesting question. And I always think the monetization of things certainly outweighs anything that we feel about taking care of nature, because we also think that it's a resource for us to make money. So there's that thing there, but I still get to go out into nature and find joy there. So yes, you can dwell. I do mention the comment by the Kansas commissioner this week, commissioner of education, who in a board meeting on Monday night said, someone said, well, the COVID numbers are going down. And his response was, yes, now you're more likely to be killed by Indians and tornadoes in Kansas. Yes, that's what we all did. So we wrote a letter. I'm part of the Kansas Association for Native American Education. And so we wrote a very nice letter offering our help to educate, because if you all remember your history books in school, it wasn't about us. It was a footnote, but it was all about settler colonial history and how natives got in the way of the progress. But we said we would be glad to be a resource. And of course, the governor even called for him to resign. He did resign, but the rest of his colleagues on the Board of Education rejected his resignation. So those kinds of things really hurt hard, and it's kind of a constant thing. And I'm just speaking for my reactions and interactions. So yeah, there are days it's hard to find joy, and there are days you just spend that moment in time and just be real angry. But then just set that time for yourself, and then know that, okay, got that out of my system, let me move on. But it's a challenge. That's why I work on it so hard. Thanks for the question.
Where it comes from, it gives us the ability to.
Hey, I don't see anyone with any raised hands or.
Sylvia has her hand up.
Okay, Sylvia, yeah.
Well, I left 45 minutes before the program, so I would have time to run my dog at the restored prairie up the hill. But then when I got up there, after exercising him and throwing his toy, I just decided I would just lie down on my back, and all this tall grass, which is all just like a most cushy mattress you could ever imagine, and just looked at the sky, which there were no clouds, but it has that effect like it's moving far, far away. And then I was finally coming back really late. I ran into 3 different groups of neighbors who I hadn't talked to for a while. So then we reconnected with each other. And then I walked into your talk late, but just enough to hear. And thank you for a wonderful talk. It was just really reinforcing and wonderful. And also, I wanted to know about, I've noticed when I talk to Native American people, they give you space to talk. They really listen to what you're saying. And I feel like we talk over each other all the time, like I am guilty of that. Is that something you do consciously, or is it inside you?
I think that to me, that comes from the collectivism that we are. We were called socialist last week by something that I saw. That there's just such a confusion, but collectivism is everyone has equal space. If I catch a whale, every person in the village gets an equitable share. If there are 100 people in that village, the whale gets divided by 100 parts, or even if it's a deer or something. So everyone is equitable. So we don't look for that one person high up and that it's very equitable. And I think that to me is that taking time to sit and talk, which is one of our cultural patterns. Take that time, sit and talk to one another, reflect, and wait for that question or answer. And yeah, it is. And I, of course, I can speak for me. I can speak for my father's, and what I learned from my father and what I learned from my mother, who are from different tribes. So I can't speak for all 1,000 different tribes in the country, of which 572 are civilized tribes, only called that because at one time had a treaty with the US Congress. But I can't speak for all. I can just speak for who I am and what I have observed in my parents' tribes.
Great. Thank you. Looks like Lauren and Lynn have their hand up. So if you folks want to go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you for your reflection. I wanted to mention, I just started reading Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Kimmerer. And on page 43, she mentions knowing names, but not the stories. Not the songs. So a botanist, a scientist is working with an indigenous soul to identify plants and learn about them. And he compliments this person who he had really underestimated in terms of knowledge. He said, "You know a lot of plant names." And the indigenous soul says, with a down-faced look, I know the names, but I don't know their songs. He's not sufficiently knowledgeable to really feel he's sharing enough. And that's what Kimmerer says about her starting to teach ecology and botany, that she was teaching a very scientific, mechanistic way of looking at plants and not the true nature of the plants and so on. I was wondering if that's related to the poem you were remembering, the poem you were thinking about.
Oh, it's probably one of them. I think that is something that we hear a lot. Joy Harjo has this wonderful anthology of indigenous writers, and you do see those themes a lot.
Yeah.
And I did a talk once at work. There's this thing that the leadership studies does called "What Matters to Me and Why," and it was all a reflection on my dad, who know something about everything and know everything about something, so that you always remain curious. And his main thing is ask everyone for their story. Everyone you meet, learn their story, because when you learn the story, those walls that separate you fade away, and you learn one another's stories. And we don't take time for that. We don't stop and say, even if we're on a political divide, we really have a hard time saying, tell me why you think this. Tell me what brought you this, or what were the conditions that led to this way of thinking or believing. We don't do that with one another. And I think a lot of people are shy to ask such things. And especially with what I've noticed is, thank you for asking a question like that. Some people will assume something that, like, in fact, like all indigenous people are the same. No, we all had different practices. Think of how isolated people were when there wasn't communication, and that maybe the other tribe was 2 days walk from where you were. So yeah, your languages developed differently. All of these things that kind of isolated people, and not just indigenous people around the world, and how they came to develop those ways of thinking. But I think one of the things I have seen that we have in common with other tribes is that concept of finding the song. And certainly Robin really points that out in her book, which I like. I hope I answered that question.
All right. Thanks, Deborah. Diane, I saw you had your hand up at one point. Did you still have something to contribute?
Yes, it's just changed. I just decided to
Okay,
wait a while.
okay.
I think there's a real shift going on where people are beginning to listen to Native people. And I think some of it's driven by the churches who were involved in the boarding schools, who have a moral sense and are owning up to this unbelievable situation. And also, I think you're spot on by making the remark that, colonialism traffics its parents, its mother, its grandmothers. So you have to speak the truth. It is trafficking. The earth has been trafficked to the point where she's exhausted and we need to make a change. And so when I see people listening to people like Robin Wall Kimmerer and listening really hard and realizing that there's no difference between understanding and science, and Joy Harjo, and now you, it's such a blessing to have you speak for us and with us and give your perspective. And we showed a film, Wisdom Keepers showed a film by the Anglican Church of Canada, because they wanted to own up to, they're, I forget the term now, but when you revoke the doctrine of discovery. So there's more talk about revoking the doctrine of discovery. And so now I have a question, Deborah, do you feel the shift of people now wanting to hear your words? And would you share the Uncompahgre statement, prayer that you gave us so that people could see it again and maybe memorize it and maybe let it become part of them? And thank you so much for speaking today.
Thank you, Diane. Yes, I'll put it in that in your Google Drive. So
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Okay. Looks like Larry also has his hand up. Larry, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. Two things. First, let's extinguish the chalice before it burns my house down. But secondly, this notion that Sylvia brought up and that has been a thread through what you were saying and Diane, this notion of listening. Well, remember our gathering song, when we tell each other's stories and we listen with a loving mind, that means taking the time to let the other person find the words. I speak very slowly often because it takes me a while, and it has always taken me a while. It's not just that I'm getting old. It's always taken me a while to find words. And I really appreciate the folks who pause and let me find the word. But finally, your comment about, and one that Diane brought up, knowing the name is not the same as knowing the person or the plant. This is a story, this is a theme that Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize winning physicist, brought up. He was out walking with his father and they saw a bird. And little Dickie Feynman says, "Daddy, what's that bird?" And the father says, "Well, in Dutch, it's called this. And in Japanese, they say this. But once you've said that, you don't know anything about the bird. Let's watch the bird. See the bird peck on the ground. What is it trying to do there? See it peck another bird. What is it doing? Is this a friendly, helpful petting, or is this aggressive?" Knowing the story, knowing the name is not even scratching the surface, except it does facilitate communication so that you can talk to other people about the robin and they won't think you're referring to an eagle. So once again, thank you very much for all your comments.
Thank you. That makes me think of the violent way in which baby doves feed from their mothers. Doves are the only bird that produce a sort of milk. And when the baby's getting it, he has to poke back in the craw when the mouth is open. And it looks very violent because that's how he releases the milk. And so maybe that's what he was seeing it because it looks very violent. What the heck is that bird? Because the babies get pretty, I mean, you know, the little squabs get pretty big when they're down on the ground with them, you know, but it looks really violent, but they're just feeding. So knowing that, you know, knowing those little stories. Thank you.
Okay. I saw that Anna Franklin had her hand up at one point. Did you still have something?
Well, maybe. So I wanted to share the joy that I had. I was lucky to see just in time, the Beach Museum had a program last week with Karen Miriam Goldberg, and I thought, wow, what a chance to listen to her and get inspired. So I went and did it. It was a free program, beautiful program, listening to her, wonderful poet. And then afterwards, she asked for people to express what they had gleaned during the program. And I totally forget what I said now, but it was so beautiful that she really listened to what I said. And then there was a little pause, and then she said, you know, I think you have the beginning of a poem there, which I hadn't even thought of. So I probably should have written it down right away, but I didn't. I thought, well, isn't that cool? And then I thought, well, she really listened to me. And that's such a good feeling. I think we all want to give that feeling to each other, that someone really hears what we're saying. Yeah. So thank you. It was a beautiful, beautiful program, Deborah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, looks like we're almost to noon, so I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Larry here. And should we do breakout rooms, Larry, or what?
Why don't we try that?
Okay. Okay. Dan, can you go ahead and set that up for us?
Future conveners, please notice that I am setting a low bar for your competence.
Well, how many are on? We only have 17 on the, so why don't we just stay in the main room?
Okay.
And you can put yourself to gallery view, and then everybody can see everybody else, and can continue to talk. And we'll just leave this on here, and you can leave when you're ready to go make yourself some lunch. And Dr. Bolton can leave when she needs to go. So, but as many people want to keep talking.
Dan, how do I put myself on gallery view?
Click up on the upper right. There should be a little word that says view.
Well, at the moment it says
way
chat.
up. Okay, close the chat. To the left of the chat, then.
Well, I have just lost everybody. I only see you.
Larry, if you can hear me, up in the upper right corner of your computer, there's a little tiny box.
Well, I think that I've made the Zoom thing real small.
Oh, okay. I can't help you with that.
Could I say something?
Oh, something happened. Pat, go ahead.
I just, first of all, I want to thank Deborah, our beloved friend, really, in so many ways. And thank you for the joy, really, that you brought in every way, your song, your words, your wonderful presence with us. And then I also appreciate you answering the question about how does it make you and your people feel, you know, with what's going on in terms of some of the things that are happening today with our native indigenous people. I just want to point out that often I think we forget how far and wide the indigenous population is, even in our own country. And one of those places is Hawaii. And I have this book, and I thought of that with you, Deborah, when you were talking about here. Recently, we went and I bought this book there. It's called Then There Were None. It's just this little book, and it's written by Native Hawaiian. And it's got pictures on every page with then a beautiful poem or summary or something of their, not just their life, but their beliefs and what happened to them in terms of being colonized, coming from Polynesia in the year 500. I mean, it's been, you know, that long ago, and how they have managed to do this. But what's interesting is that this book, which is written recently, goes back that far and brings people up this far about where they are in today's society, like you are from your history, you know, and your heritage. And I mean, sometimes we just don't realize how far around the world the indigenous people and culture go. I mean, I think of New Guinea. I wish I could go to New Guinea sometime. I mean, all the gorgeous birds and everything, and find that. And that's also what Diane said about the doctrine of discovery. I mean, that's affected every country in the world, it seems. And so I just want to say that you can get so much from a tiny little book like this. Yeah. I couldn't believe it. It just, and what they call the Aloha spirit, which is really a spirit, and these beautiful pictures that they took of their ancient people.
Just as some background, my husband's mother is Hawaiian Portuguese. You know, the Azorians went to what is now Hawaii in the late 1700s, and they took with them two little stringed instruments. One was called the cavaquinha, and the other one was called the bugina. And then King David, Kamehameha, loved it so much, but he thought the sound was like a jumping flea, so he named it the ukulele. But make no mistake, the ukulele came from the Azorians, not the Hawaiians. But they adopted it because he loved it so much. And we do have a statue of King Kamehameha in our bedroom. Really? I mean, it's just, that's where he put it, but he's very loyal to his Hawaiian roots.
Yeah, yeah.
Azorian Hawaiian.
That's beautiful.
Portuguese, yeah. Actually. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that.
Well, it was a pleasure to link it with you, really.
Thank you.
Well, once again, Dr. Bolton, thank you very much. Friends and co-religionists, I'm so glad you're here. And remember, next week we meet in person as well as via Zoom. I'm sure we'll be masked, but maybe we could. Well, maybe we can't hug, but we can certainly fist bump. Okay. So
thank you.
So long, everyone. Have a good week.
Bye.
Bye.
Here.